Sup, chooms? I've got some breaking news for you, and unfortunately, it is not good news, particularly if you live in Europe. The European Union has decided to launch an investigation into the two most effective hair loss drugs available today, finasteride and dutasteride. An official branch of the EU called the European Medicines Agency has decided to start a, quote, review of medicines containing finasteride and dutasteride following concerns regarding suicidal ideation and behaviors, unquote. This EU website includes an 86-page document that lists every single medication containing finasteride or dutasteride that is available in the EU. For finasteride, that includes tablets containing either 1 milligram or 5 milligrams of finasteride, and for dutasteride, the only available dose is 0.5 milligrams. The list includes drugs marketed for either hair loss or for treating an enlarged prostate, as well as combinations of these drugs with other drugs. The initial review process has just started, and it should end in February of 2025. During the review, each manufacturer of finasteride or dutasteride will be sent 5 questions. These include questions about sales figures in the EU, data on the risk of suicide, data on possible mechanisms of suicide from 5-AR blockers, an assessment of the risk versus benefit of the drugs, and proposals to mitigate the risk. In addition, the EU Medical Agency will review the cases of suicide reported in the Drug Vigilance Database that the EU uses. The end result of all this is that the current authorization for the use of these drugs in the EU will either be maintained, varied, suspended, or withdrawn completely. So yes, chooms, the EU is very aggressive in terms of regulation. Just ask Apple, Google, and Microsoft. So it is unfortunately possible that these drugs could be outright banned in Europe. It seems like this review was initiated in France, which is especially strange to me because France is the nation of love. But they aren't showing much love to men who are suffering from the slaphead curse here, are they? Followers of this channel will remember that back in 2022, the FDA was put under similar pressure to withdraw finasteride from the market. This pressure came from the Post-Finasteride Syndrome Foundation, which is now known as the PFS Network, or maybe the PFS Network is some faction of the PFS Foundation. I don't know for sure. What I do know, though, is that the PFS Network has made perfectly clear that its goal is to withdraw finasteride from the market entirely, or at minimum, strictly regulate its use beyond how it's regulated today. The PFS Network wants to make sure that every single finasteride user on the planet loses valuable access to this drug just because a small but vocal and litigious group of finasteride users either didn't have a good experience with the drug or are too afraid to use it. I mean, just think about how damn selfish that is. Tylenol is a drug that has far more serious side effects than finasteride. People have even died from it, but there's never been a concerted effort to outright ban Tylenol as far as I know. Also, banning these drugs would completely ignore the new research coming out that finasteride and dutasteride have on longevity benefits that go well beyond just their effects on the prostate and hair follicles. I go over these studies in several videos that I'll link below, but the point I'm trying to make here is that banning these drugs because of unproven risk could very well result in the shortening of our lifespans, and that's due to the increased risk of cardiovascular disease and cancer risks that these drugs have been shown to reduce. Because of pressure from these finasteride hate groups, the FDA had already added the risk of depression and persistent sexual side effects to the label preemptively in hopes of mitigating the risk of litigation, but this was not enough to appease the PFS Network. So, in 2022, suicidal ideation and behavior was added to the finasteride label despite the fact that the FDA carefully pointed out that, quote, the group's petition does not provide reasonable evidence of a causal link between propecia and persistent sexual problems, depression, or suicide, unquote. And of course, the FDA is completely correct here. There is no study showing that the risk of depression and suicide is any higher in people with hair loss who take finasteride or dutasteride versus people with hair loss who don't take finasteride or dutasteride. On the contrary, it is hair loss itself that leads to depression and potentially even to suicide. So finasteride isn't just some vanity drug, Jooms. It literally saves people's lives. It's not enough to just simply say that there have been some cases of suicide in people who have used finasteride to establish any kind of causal link. If a person once took finasteride but then stopped it because of side effects and then they got depression that led to suicide because of his continued hair loss, then their suicide was not caused by finasteride, it was caused by hair loss. However, according to the PFS Network and the definition of post-finasteride syndrome, this suicide would be blamed on finasteride. In the original randomized controlled trials of finasteride being used for both prostate enlargement and hair loss, loss, there was no indication of any mental health issues related to finasteride whatsoever. Since then, there are even some large database studies that show that the risk of suicide is not elevated. So this isn't the place to go over all the data on this. I've done several videos on it already that I'll link below. But whatever happens from this, I'm hoping that the EU will do a good job and come to the same conclusion as the FDA, which is that there is no good evidence of any link between finasteride and dutasteride and the risk of suicide. What I think will most likely happen is that the EU will simply update the label like the FDA did by saying that there have been post-marketing reports of suicide with these drugs, though there is no proven link, of course. Now, that may give the finasteride haters some more propaganda in their lifelong crusade to validate their decision not to use finasteride and therefore be sexless, slap-headed, internet-dwelling, neck-bearded incel losers for all of eternity. But at least for the rest of us, we'll still have access to both of these amazing drugs that protect our hair and improve our lives. If the EU really wants to prevent people from committing suicide, then they'll keep their damn hands off of 5-AR inhibitors forever because these drugs save lives. But I'll be keeping a close eye on the situation as it develops, and hopefully my next update on the situation will be a positive one. Okay, so just wanted to give you all a quick update on that news, but we'll be back with more hair loss witchery in the near future, so thank you so much for watching. Keep the faith, my fellow hair loss witchers. I'll see you all soon. God bless.